My name's GuyK. I've been a professional bike and kit tester for nearly 25 years. And today, the tech talk I'm giving is on Scott's radical hidden shock racer, the new Spark RC team issue AXS. So first thing to talk about is obviously the hidden shock setup. Basically, inside here, rather than the linkage driving the shock externally, you've got a linkage that goes inside the frame, and it's got a little bell cam in there, and it drives a SID 45mm stroke shock, which is mounted more or less vertically inside the frame. It's a design that's inspired by Bold, who Scott bought a controlling interest in 2019, but there are differences obviously in the kinematic that Scott have connected it to, and the positioning of the shock is slightly different. If you look underneath, I've taken off the casing already, but as you can see, there's easy access there to the remote control, the rebound, and the air valve. So, you know, setup is pretty easy there. When we get around to the other side, I'll show you the little window that lets you look at the upper end of the shock, so you can check how far your stroke's been. And also there's a sag indicator on that side as well. And that's all covered up in general use by a neat plastic plate that just half locks into place and keeps that all covered up. So the shock is really protected physically, it's protected from weather, it's protected from roost, anything else flying up, and it also means that the whole shock weight is down right low in the belly of the bike for kind of the most sorted and planted handling dynamics. And also, you know, bottom bracket height, although it looks relatively high because it's in a trench here, only 330mm on this bike, which is pretty low for 120mm travel. So again, really sorted, low slung geometry there. In terms of the rest of the geometry, you've got a 67.2 head angle as standard on this RC version, because that's got a 120mm SID fork in the front, but it's got adjustable headset caps in there, so you can slacken it or steepen it by 0.6 degrees just by lifting the stem up slightly, just loosening the front end off, and then just turning the cups either top and bottom or both to make your angle adjustment there. And there is a 900 series of bikes as well, which come with a 130mm fork of various types, and they have a 65.8 degree head angle. And they also come with wider bars, chunkier tyres, and a kind of more general trail setup. So whereas these RC bikes are very much the racy end of things. So as you can see, you've got 740mm flat bar. The 65mm stem is actually flipped, so it's upside down. But also, while we're in here, you can see really neat internal cable routing. I mean, there's a lot of cabling going on here, even on this AXS bike, which obviously means it's got wireless shifters from SRAM. You've still got the twin lock remote there for the front lockout and the rear lockout, and that's a two-phase lockout. So one push of the button gives you a much firmer compression setup for sort of sprinting and climbing. They call it traction, but to be fair, it's more of a sort of hard pedal platform, and it is pretty hard. It's harder than most pedal platforms, I want to say, and it also changes the travel slightly. And then another push gives you full-on lockout for those sprinting and road sections. So again, proper racer setup. And as you'll see, and we'll go into this later as well, there's no dropout lever here. That you need to add onto the bottom. So once you've got a dropper post on here, you'll end up with a triple lever setup. So fairly congested, which is why it's good to see that Scott have at least tried to manage some of the cabling, feed it inside the stem. And while this bike gets the alloy stem and bar, it's also, there's the more expensive bikes get carbon setup, which also has internal cable routing, as you'd expect. But if you're a mechanic, don't despair too much. It's deliberately designed so you can still do pretty much all the work you need to on the headset and changing stem, moving spaces, etc. These spaces just interlock together without pulling anything apart. The only thing you really need to unplug is the rear hose on the brake, and that just plugs straight back in if you do need to fully pull it apart. But like I say, you can change the adjustable headset cups on the trail if you want, in terms of the rotation, to get those different angles. In terms of the rest of the geometry, it's a 470mm reach. It's an 1190, yeah, I am saying that right, 1190mm wheelbase on this large, and it's a 76.6 seat angle. So relatively steep seat angle. You've got room, as you can see, just about room for a relatively low tread 2.4-inch tyre. I mean, that might sound big volume, and it's a 62mm tyre, but that's exactly what Nino uses. Obviously, Nino Schurter, 8 times world champion, 7 times World Cup overall winner. You know, one of the legendary racers, has been on Scott for years and years and years, and this is pretty much Nino's race setup in terms of 2.4-inch Maxxis tyre and a 30mm rim. So, and again, up front, you're getting the 35mm legged SID, not the 32mm legged SID SL. So there are quite a few choices on here where components are definitely on the kind of race trail boundary. You know, 30mm rim, 2.4-inch tyre, 35mm leg fork. It just goes to show how hard racers and recreational riders, you know, just fast cross-country riders, are hitting the trail now, and how tough the XC courses and trail, you know, well, basically, I guess our expectations as riders have really, really ramped up, and this bike is fully equipped to pretty much match all of them. There's one glaring issue, which I'll go into later, but in terms of other detailing, you've got 2 bottle cage mounts. That's on a double mounting, so you can slide that up to get the seat post bottle cage in there, the seat tube bottle cage in there. It comes with this Syncross cage with a built-in multi-tool, so that's a nice feature. As you can see here, there's a nice little sort of roost flange, I guess, over the main pivot there, and you can see how wide that main pivot is. It's actually an extra wide in terms of pedal stance, so 55mm offset on there, which is a little bit more than usual, but I've had zero problems with pedalling around today. To be totally honest, I've not had a massive amount of time on this bike. I've literally just ridden it up here for about an hour, just been riding around getting the setup dialed in. But I've always been a massive fan of the Spark. I had one as a long-termer in 2008 when they first came out, and it's always been a really, really sorted bike, and always quite progressive in terms of sort of its trail attitude and its geometry numbers, way, way, way before anyone thought of down country. And obviously, looking at this bike, you know, there's some seriously big pieces of carbon fibre holding it all together. And it's actually built in 2 halves. There's like a stiffness half, they call it, along the bottom line here, this massive down tube. A lot of people in comments and forums I've already seen say it looks like an e-bike. And there's a fair point, you know, with that shock hidden in there, it is a pretty massive BB area. But it gives a huge amount of stiffness. I mean, obviously, I'm going to do a live ride review on this. I've already started recording it, but that is such a stiff structure. And then you look at these massive chainstays, these huge sort of carbon mandibles. It just feels so solid underfoot through these alloy dub cranks. The whole bike just goes bang, you know, you put the power down. There's a little bit of lag on the rear hub, so if there's a gap and the power kind of slams through, it's such a jolt. It's so stiff, and it's so precise up the front end as well. And because you've got these really short little linkages, and because they're really broad stance, and because they can use much bigger bearings on this seat tube arrangement, then the whole back end of this bike is absolutely locked down in terms of stiffness. And, you know, when you're still getting 120mm of travel out of a 45mm shock, so, you know, the shock's working relatively hard. It's a fairly high leverage ratio, so that naturally makes it a relatively firm feeling shock, and SID shocks are damped like that anyway. Various bikes in the different range get SID shocks or Fox shocks or X Fusion shocks on the lower end bikes, because pricing goes from 2,199. You can get the cheapest 900 series bike in alloy. The carbon fibre RC bikes start at 3,300. And there are 5 different types of frame as well. There's HMX SL, which is used on the top of the range bike. They top out at $11.99 for the full limited or full RC team issue replica versions with full SRAM Axis XX1 on there, including the dropper posts. But that's only 1,807 grams, including the shock. I mean, that's seriously light, even if you don't include the shock in there. And Scott, I mean, it's a claimed weight from Scott, but one thing I found in 25 years of reviewing bikes is Scott are incredibly honest about their weights, even though they generally seem like the most ridiculously light weights. When I've actually bothered to pull bikes apart, they've pretty much been exact to the gram. Then you get the HMX, standard bike, which weighs 1990 grams. Then you get this frame, which is the HMF, which is 2150 grams. And then you get a version which has this front end and an alloy rear end. That's 2590 grams. And then there's an all alloy bike, which is 2990 grams. And the same frame is used across the RC versions and the 900 trail versions. The only difference is you get 130mm fork up front and you get a slightly different build kit on there. In terms of this bike, this is 4,600, give or take a penny, give or take a quid. You get the SID Select fork, so the 35mm legged SID chassis, same chassis as the other forks. So you've got a recessed lower leg, you've got this reprofiled crown with plenty of room for this 2.4 tyre. You can actually get a screw-in fender for the back of it as well, although to be honest they're that small they're pretty much useless in the UK. You've got the twin position compression lever on the top. You only get the you get a more basic Charger damper than the top end Ultimate forks. Unsurprisingly, you don't get Charger race day, but you get the same debonair spring, you get the same SKF seals and bushings, and you get the same Maxima plush fluid in there as well. And this fork is so capable. I mean, the damper's a little bit firmer, and it takes about, I'd say about 10 to 12 hours for a SID to properly bed in. It's quite common with RockShox, that forks at the moment. They take a good few rides to actually supple out. But once this fork gets fluid, it's amazingly well controlled. It's just a little, basically, it's just a little bit heavier than the Ultimate version because it's got a larger amount of oil in the damper. And staying up the front end, it's got Shimano XT brakes. It's the single pot brakes, so the lighter version of Shimano's XT brake. You've got SRAM's AXS shifter. I'll just put a link to the whole AXS Force video. I think it's an absolutely brilliant setup. Amazing custom tuning, amazing performance, obviously keeps the bars totally clutter free. Like I say, you've got Scott's own twin lock set up on the remote for the shocks there, and you've got Syncross grips as well. Nice narrow gauge, you know, racer friendly flangeless grips with a soft end on the outside, so you can hang your hand off the end if 740 is feels a bit restrictive for you. But to be honest, I find it really suits the ride of the bike. Going down to the base, you've got a GX crank. It's a 32 tooth chainring. You can fit a 40 tooth chainring on this bike if you want to. I mean, it's got that little carbon fibre scuff guard there in case the chain does get thrown somehow, and you've got this long bit of protection along the chainstay as well, and another matching bumper inside the seat stay there. But it will fit up to a 40 tooth if you've got legs like Nino. But I think I'd like to see it with a 34, to be honest. I think with a 1052 cassette on the back, it is a race bike. I mean, this whole bike comes in 1183. I mean, it comes in bang on 12 with the bottle cage on there, but that bottle cage is 170 grams. So 1183 for this bike in a large without pedals on. And then down here, you've got the SRAM GX AXS rear mech as well. So full wireless transmission from SRAM and Shimano brakes. Then I've already mentioned the Maxxis Recon race tyres, front and rear, and they're sat on Syncross Silverton 2 alloy rims with a 30mm internal diameter. So really good broad stance for these large volume tyres. And you know, obviously it's kind of the mid-range bike. It's the heaviest of the carbon frames that you can get, but as a package I think it's really well sorted for the money. Certainly, you know, wireless shifting, great set of tyres, great fork. It's the carbon frame, which is significantly lighter than the alloy or the hybrid frame. You know, it's a really sorted package for the money, considering the amount of innovation and, well, just the level of quality and detailing in this frame. And now I've just flipped it round so you can see here you've got this sag marker on the outside, so it's really easy to check that you've got your pressure roughly right. I've found running at about 25% is pretty much spot on. Like I say, it's a naturally taut feel, so don't worry about it feeling saggy at 25%, even if you like a fairly pert race style bike. You've got a little rubber hatch there, that just pops off and you can see where the shock travel ring's sitting at, so if you do need to change the air pressure you can do it that way, and it also lets you get to the shock hardware as well. And the shock actually sits on a trunnion mount as well, so it's a bearing mounted shock to really increase the sensitivity. You've got post mount brakes, just keeping it tucked in out of the way there on the rear end. And the axle quick release actually includes a T25, a T30 and a 6mm. So most of the things you're going to need to get either front or rear axle off and adjust the stem bolts and stuff like that are all pretty much catered for in that rear axle handle, which is a really, really nice touch. Going back into the belly of the frame, you've got this press fit 92 bottom bracket. So again, super wide, massive stiffness through that belly of that bike. I mean, you could say looks like an e-bike, and sometimes when you stamp on the pedals it feels like a damn e-bike as well, because it is so stiff. And then, you know, in contrast with that top tube, that sort of what they call the lightweight section, I mean, some parts of that, because all the shock loading can be put through the belly there, some parts of that are thinner than a credit card, apparently, the carbon. So serious piece of engineering, this bike, to get it so stiff and yet so light, which leaves the only real, you know, in terms of trail or even aggressive cross-country use, I'd say the only kind of sticking point really is the lack of a dropper post. I mean, I can see why they've done it. Not everyone races with a dropper post yet, but the top 4 bikes in the RC range all come with a dropper post, but the lower priced ones don't. So, I mean, it's all fully plumbed in, you know, you've got all the, you know, there's plenty of space in there to drop a post in, to drop a dropper post in, and then, you know, the cable routes out of there, and then you fit the lever under a twin lock lever there. And they've, as you can see, they've moved to 31.6. Scott used to be 34.9, which is a lot harder to get a dropper post for. So they've gone to a more conventional diameter. But, well, to be honest, as soon as I finish recording this, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stick a simple and cheap rodeo manual release post in there, so I can properly explore the suspension and the capability of this bike. Because as it is, I mean, I've ridden up it, like I say, I've blatted up here blisteringly quick, and it is super fast. I mean, just, and so effortlessly fast, and kind of, but with a really, really just kind of planted, hench, stiff, precise feel to it. But I haven't really been able to throw it around yet because I've been high posting. So that's kind of the tech detail on it. If you want to know how this bike actually rides, make sure you watch that live ride review. So massive thanks to Scott for lending me the bike to test. Massive thanks to Giro Cycling UK for sponsoring the channel. Thanks to PTs and Crud as well. And huge thanks to my Patreon supporters who support the channel on a monthly basis just with a small pledge, and they get early, exclusive, extended and ad-free edits as a thank you. So if you really like what I'm doing with the channel, you want to see it keep growing, you want to see me be able to put more time aside to make these edits, then please consider supporting me on Patreon. But as it is, please subscribe if you haven't subscribed already, click the notification so you know when the next videos are coming out, and tell your mates about the channel. That's probably the most important thing for helping the channel grow and getting more people on board with GuyK TV. But for now, I have been Guy Kestevan on GuyK TV, talking about Scott's sensational looking Spark RC team issue AXS.